So I was scrolling around on the Google Discover page and I saw that basically my favourite guitar player and the guitarist I'd say that's been most influential to me in terms of tone, Eric Johnson, he's revealed, according to this Ultimate Guitar blog, that he intends to go back to his early blues influences for his next record, which will be a little bit more straight ahead and not tons of pedals and gimmicks and stuff. Everything's just gotten so, there's so much option anxiety as far as gear, and then the whole digital technology and everything is just gotten so crazy. I thought, well, we need just to return to raw basics, just playing straight up into the amp. I kind of wondered, does he have a point? And so let's just kind of discuss this.
This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So I think option anxiety around gear is an interesting kind of idea. I feel like it's a little bit of a situation where actually most normal people possibly don't have the money where option anxiety is as much of a thing as someone who can get free gear or get given gear and that sort of stuff. I think particularly for me as a kid growing up, and just practicing and stuff like that, I guess before the days of YouTube and stuff, but there were still magazines that were promoting lots of gear and stuff. I think for quite a long time I was kind of happy with what I had, you know, whether that be like an Ibanez RG7620 was my main guitar for quite a long time. I was fairly happy with a Marshall AVT 150 head for an amount of time. And then I guess, you know, as I started to get like a little bit of money from odd jobs and, you know, helping my dad on the farm and stuff like that, that's when, you know, when I had some money, I started to think about these options and getting down into sort of like the Mesa Boogie kind of rabbit hole and Dream Theater and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's definitely an easy thing to get into, this idea. So around the time of lockdown, you know, because gigs got cancelled and stuff like that, in the UK, the government were given essentially kind of like grants to people that were you know, suffering through not having their normal gig income. I think I spent some of that on, you know, frivolous stuff like amps that really I definitely didn't need and stuff like that. So I definitely feel like it's a thing where the next kind of thing, you know, where he's talking about digital modeling, I see that as a kind of separate issue altogether in a lot of ways. So the first thing I guess is that if you're trying to select a modeler in 2024, then I guess that's kind of difficult in terms of there being like a lot of options and you know, quite rigorous marketing from all of them. But for me, I think my 3 top choices would probably be like a Helix or HX Stomp, probably, rather than the full Helix. Anything by Fractal, you know, an FM3 and FM9, I think are really good. The Quad Cortex I would choose over the Tone Master Pro, although there are some reliability issues around the Quad Cortex. I think the Quad Cortex is the only modeler that I've ever heard Eric Johnson say that he's actually got his hands on, so whether they sent him one or something like that. Yeah, so what would Line 6 stuff, Fractal stuff, maybe the Neural DSP stuff. But with all of this modeler stuff, there is definitely, especially with Fractal, early on for me, there was, you know, this option paralysis sort of thing where you're looking through loads and loads and loads of menus and you're looking through loads of options. But I think it's important to remember in that sort of case, like what the goal might be for you personally. And I think this is good advice in general, is to start building your rigs around real life stuff. So, you know, I've discovered loads of great tones from trying to replicate something in real life, whether that is Eric Johnson himself, you know, kind of looking through old rig pictures and setups and reading about how he sets up his amps and cabs and what drives he's using, what combinations of stuff, you know, what's he using for delay, what's all of that sort of stuff. I've kind of, you know, happened across nice tones. Even if I didn't get particularly close to Eric's tones, I definitely came across some tones that I thought, well, that's enjoyable to play at least. So I think that for me is one really key way to get out of this kind of option anxiety thing and sort of more like option opportunity, where certainly in the digital modeling world, that's one of the key things about it that is actually very cool, is that you can get in there and experiment and it doesn't cost you that much in terms of, you know, buying a new pedal to try something that you saw that Eric Johnson was digging at the time, or buying a £4,500 amplifier that Eric Johnson's been using, you know, for about 10 years, like the Two Rock stuff. You can actually get into these modeling things and go, right, well, what would it sound like if I was putting a Dynacomp into a Fender Twin? And yes, it may not sound exactly like Eric Johnson, for instance, but it can get you in a ballpark of tone, which I think is really good. And I think also that a thing that has happened for me over time with modeling is that you start to kind of curate your own sort of tonal landscape. So your go-to things, and I've interacted with guys on the Line 6 Helix groups on Facebook and stuff like that, where people have their kind of go-to amps for stuff. I think of Joshua Parrish, guy who I gave a Skype lesson to a few years ago, you know, particularly fond of like the Mesa Boogie Mark IV. That's one of his go-to amps, and the Derailed Ingrid. You see kind of Terrence Young, who posts on there, I think one of his go-to amps is like the PRS, the Line 6 Litigator. For me personally, no, I do loads of experimentation, but my core tones and most of what you hear me playing on this channel will either be with Eric Lead 2023, which was obviously inspired by Eric Johnson. That's built around the Line 6 Litigator, or more recently I've been using these kind of glassy plexi presets, which were a tweaked version of that preset, but then using a plexi essentially, dialing that in for some kind of sparklier tones. And what I found is that, you know, my delay settings, I've kind of settled on a thing that works for me. Reverb settings, likewise, I use the Glitz reverb a ton, and the dual delay 375-500. That's a really nice thing that I've started to lean on those so much that real world delays and reverbs, you know, like the real pedals, don't really do it for me as much as in the digital world like the Helix, where I'm very happy that I've found kind of my tone in there. You know, I think that's a really cool thing about the digital modeling stuff, is that you can start to kind of curate your own space. And particularly for me, coming into my bedroom every single day and starting from scratch, just plugging a guitar into an interface and being able to conjure up the tones that I like, that I'd probably dialed in maybe a year or two ago, and just come back to them every day and not have to be thinking about, you know, well, what amp, what pedal, what stuff will I use today. I think that's an actual huge advantage that the digital modeling stuff can have. As well as if you're recording DI, you could then at a later date put it back through a real amplifier if you wanted to, and that sort of thing. But I think it's a great way to be kind of creating music. For me personally, I just now plug straight into my audio interface basically most of the time and start having a way at something. I do think there's also definitely something to this idea of kind of getting back to basics, though, whether that is in the digital world, so sometimes stripping back your preset and going, well, let's start again. Do I need all of these aspects, or could I change the cab? If I change just one small thing instead of everything, you know, or take away some elements, I think that could be a really good approach, as well as just getting in a room with a real amplifier again. I think Eric's on something, but digital modeling for me, I think, offers the most opportunity to think least about gear, weird as that might sound. I don't have to worry about miking the amp, I don't have to worry about how it's sounding in the room. I can literally just be focusing on my guitar playing. Don't know if you feel anywhere similar about that. If you like my tones, you can jump into the Gumroad folder and grab them. But I saw that article come up from Eric Johnson and I thought, yeah, option anxiety is a thing. With the digital modeling stuff though, that's less of a thing for me than even with the other devices, I think. What's your thoughts? Leave them in the comments below if you fancy. Cheers for stopping by.